Good morning. First off, I need to ask your indulgence today. I'm on the backside of a cold. I'm not contagious. I don't have fever anymore. Scratchy throat's gone, but I do have the sniffle still and cough. So if you just bear with me on that, we'll try to get through. Let's remember all of those that are on the sick, injured, and walking wounded list. Doug had his knee tapped and drawn some fluid off, and he's feeling a little bit better. April had her surgery Wednesday, and I was privileged to take her to her first physical therapy Friday, which she wasn't too happy about that, but she's going to be all right. Brother Terry, keep him in our prayers, to Moody's, Tina, and the Prices, because Rosie's going to have to go have some work done and go into rehab. So let's keep them in Halls. Doug's dead, yeah. How is he doing?
Well, he's making progress. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
He thinks he's the most valuable person there.
Okay. Glad to hear that. Okay. And Tim, your brother's still great. Anybody else? Almost forgot Sister Sumlin there. She's her foot issues. How you managing? Physical therapy 3 times a week. Okay. And I know you're enjoying every minute of that physical therapy. So. Okay, Marie Solid that used to worship here, stroke and fall and still in the hospital. Anybody else? Oh, yes. I just asked Luke about her this morning. Make sure her surgery is tomorrow, so let's make sure we keep Lisa in our prayers. Who did? Oh. Okay, that's Chris May. Brother Glenn, would you lead us in a prayer, please, before we begin? Amen. 1 Samuel chapter 10. 1 Samuel chapter 10. I want to thank Brother Jim Hammonds for filling in for Terry Wednesday night. Some had asked about me, and I had been up since 2:30 with taking April up to Alabaster to the hospital, and you know how sitting around hospitals are, and we'd been up there I was up at 2:30, and I walked back in the door just slightly after 6, so I was about to fall asleep on my steps to my recliner, so that's where I was Wednesday night. But thank Jim for taking over. He got into chapter 10, but I'm just going to back up and get a running start at it, because where we are now in Samuel, everything is running along fairly smoothly. No big surprises that we need to look at. But chapter 10, first verse says, Then Samuel took a vial of oil, poured it upon his head, and kissed him, and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? The only thing here that I can pick up on is that you need to recall that back in those times, uh, the way that they appointed somebody to a position or let them know that they were now in authority was to do just this. They would pour a little oil on their head, they'd kiss them and say, "Tag, you're it." Today, what happens when we change leadership? If you're in the military, uh, they have a gathering. The one leaving says his Abby Dobbies, and the one coming in says, "Glad to be here. Tag, you're it." President takes an oath. And so the transference of power, it's basically symbolic here, and it's just the way that they did things to say, "You're now the one in charge." Verse 2, "When thou art departed from me today, then thou shalt find two men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin at Zelzah, and they will say to thee," before we get to the "they say to thee," where is Rachel's tomb? It says specifically that they will find two men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin, but can you give me a close proximity geographically? Where are we talking about? I'm sorry? Around what we would term Bethlehem, okay? Then they had let him know that they had found the animals and that his father had left the care of, by leaving the care of the asses, it just meant that his son had been gone so long that he wasn't concerned about the animals anymore. He was concerned about his son, because it goes on to say he sorroweth for you. Verse 3, "Then you go forward from thence and come to the plain of Tabor, meet three men going up to God to Bethel, one carrying three kids." Now this is goats. They were going to take them for a sacrifice. "They will salute thee and give thee 2 loaves of bread, which thou shalt receive." The saluting process over in that region is somewhat similar, but yet dissimilar to what we do today. When we howdy somebody today in the South, what do we get? We generally get a howdy back. When I had the privilege of traveling to certain areas in the Northeast, you could howdy till you was blue in the face, and you may or may not get a howdy back. Now, if that had happened in the East, if you bid someone "peace be with you," or "peace," or something of that nature, and the person on the other end did the same thing, that means that you're okay. We're going to be in a friendly relationship here. If they did not say something back to you, it wasn't just that they were ignoring you or being rude. It meant that they were your enemy. So that's what this is all about here. And what's being told him is that you'll meet these three men, and they're going to bid you peace or bid you well. So they're going to be your friends. They're not going to be your enemies. And then they gave him the bread because apparently they needed some food along the way. In verse 5, "After thou shalt come to the hill of God, where the garrison of the Philistines, it shall come to pass when thou art come thither to the city, that they will meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place with a psaltery, a tabret, a pipe, a harp, and before them they shall prophesy." All those things listed are basically just instruments of music of one kind or another. If you want to do it backwards, a harp, stringed instrument, pipe, sort of like a clarinet or flute, tabret or timbrel like a drum, but who would know what a psaltery would be? Anybody? Well, if I've gone through a drum and a pipe and a string, what's left? Huh? A horned instrument. Okay. So the Spirit of the Lord, verse 6, will come up on thee, and they shall be turned into another man. Let it be when these signs are coming to thee that thou shalt do as occasion serve thee, for God is with you. Basically, all he's telling them here is that as things go along, you just do what you need to do to serve, because what you're doing, God's watching over you. God's going to take care of you. God's on your side. Verse 8, they go down to Gilgal. Behold, I will come down to thee to offer burnt offerings and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry till I come and show thee what thou shalt do. And it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. So I didn't tell you who Samuel was talking to, but who had Samuel poured all this oil on and anointed and put in charge and told him what was going to happen? Saul. Very good. So verse 10, when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets. So this next section is just going through and saying what Samuel, the prophet, had told him would happen is now taking place and happening. When we look at verse 15, Saul's uncle, tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto thee. This one is, to me, particularly interesting, what information he divulged. If you look at verse 16, Saul said to his uncle, he told us plainly that the asses were found, but of the manner of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. Now, why? Uncle also here, depending on where you go and look, it means close of kin or friend as you go loosely through the translations. So this could be a close family member or a close friend when they use the word uncle. But why do you think he would tell him about what the prophet said about the animals, but not share with him what the prophet had told him about the king to be, the kingdom that was going to be set up?
Well, when he first talked to him, he said it servant way, so it was just those two talking. So it was a private matter at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it was still supposed to be a private matter or if Saul just sort of wanted to keep it and not divulge any information.
Okay. When we get a little bit later in here, I think we'll get an explanation of what's going on. But from what we read later, personally, I take it to be that Saul was very humble. Now, if you are a humble person and you have just been, Jim, if you've just been appointed CEO of your company and the announcement has not been made yet, and you walk into the break room to have a cup of coffee and somebody asks you how your day's going, are you going to divulge all that information, or are you just going to say, well, it's been a great day so far? So because you're humble, you're not going to go into what some people might consider bragging, even though if it's fact, it's not bragging. But I take it to be that he's just a humble person, and at this point is not ready to divulge that information. Right. Because he had even said, why me? I'm the least of the, all right, absolutely. But then verse 17, Samuel called the people together unto the Lord to Mizpah and said unto the children of Israel, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt and delivered them. So he's just recounting everything that had been done so far. And he also points out in verse 19, ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations, and ye have said unto him, nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands. Again, this is just their organizational structure. Anytime they got together, it was basically by tribe, by family group. It's the same way if you go all the way back to them exiting Egypt. Did they not have a pattern that they followed on their exit out of Egypt? When they set the tabernacle up, where were the They had certain groups in certain locations. They marched in a certain formation. So here it's just telling them to get yourselves together, basically calling the assembly, and this is how you're going to do it. But I think it important to point out here that he had told them again that by you wanting a king, you have rejected the God that I just told you that did all these things. But you're going to get your way. Verse 20. Somebody have a comment? Okay. Verse 20 then says, and when Samuel had caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. And when he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by the families, the family of Matri was taken. And Saul, the son of Kish, was taken. When they sought him, he could not be found. This is where I was going by him being humble. They'd grouped together, and if you recall, they've done this before. They would call out the family group, and then they'd call out the next group and keep narrowing it down and narrowing it down. So when they got to Saul, he could not be found. Verse 22, therefore they inquired of the Lord, Father, if the man should not yet come hither, and the Lord answered, behold, he hath hid himself among the stuff. Why would you hide if you were going to be the next greatest person in the land? If you were not humble? You think it was fear? It says he was a great man. He was head and shoulders above everybody else, so I don't think fear came in there. I believe it was just because he was a little bit on the shy side, a little bit humble. Therefore they inquired of the Lord, verse 23, and they ran and fetched him thence, and when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people, from his shoulders and upward. Samuel said to all the people, see ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. God save the king is not a Hebrew expression. That's an English expression. If you go back to literal translation, it should have been, may the king live, not God save the king. But the same idea comes to place that the people had the Lord lead them through the prophets, and now they've got a king over them, and they're real happy. So with joy, they want that king to live. Verse 25, Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom, and wrote it in a book, and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul also went to Gibeah, and there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial said, how shall this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no presents, but he held his peace. Now, there's a whole bunch in this last little verse here. What Belial, what group are they? The rebels, the non-God believers, the wicked, Eli's sons were part of all of that. What is the significance then of them not bringing him presents? They didn't accept him. They didn't honor him. Because when you come before a superior, again, this is their tradition. When you come before a superior, you always bring a gift to them. It is slowly going away in our society today, but when I was growing up, many years ago, if someone had been prosperous enough to get a new house and had a housewarming, what would people do? They would flock in and they would bring a housewarming gift. And like I say, that's slowly getting away from things, but here they recognize authority by giving them gifts. I hate to bring this up, but I've got to at this section. The country has just gone through the process and elected a new president that will take office on the 20th of January. What is happening around our country today? There are protests. Does that not sound similar to what's going on here? Because they did not accept him. They despised him. And if you see the signs of the protesters out there, they basically either despise or afraid. I'm not sure of all their motives and methods, but we have the same thing going on in our country today that went on here. A certain group of people. Now, it's a little different because here, the majority, let me make sure I get this exactly the way I want it, okay? The majority of the states wanted the president that we have. The majority of the population wanted somebody else because of the Electoral College and popular vote. However, because of the way our country is run, the Electoral College was set up to equalize things across the country, because if we just went by straight popular vote, what two states would run our country? California and New York. So the rest of us would have no say in what was going on. So that's the way we're set up. The difference is who put Saul in place. It wasn't a simple majority of the states or the people, or not states, but tribes of the people. Who put Saul in place? God. So today, who are the people that are protesting, rebelling against? They're rebelling against those that voted for and the one that won. Who are these people protesting against? God, because God is the one that put them in place. Now, they're using rationale and they don't like Saul, they don't like this. But in essence, if God puts somebody in place and you rebel against that person in place, your argument is with God, not Saul. Or at least that's the way I see it. That's chapter 10. Anybody got any questions or comments or? Yes, sir. And since you said that, if you'll notice, all along the way, are any of the people that God put in place perfect? They've all made mistakes, didn't they? But in general, they took care of things. Anything else on chapter 10? As we move into chapter 11, Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. I find this particular verse kind of interesting because Nahash, what do we know about Nahash the Ammonite? All we know is Nahash was a king of Ammon, but when we get to the part where we read a little bit more about him, it could not be the same person. So Nahash is probably one of those generic family names or a title that the kings assume, similar to Egypt when they're Pharaoh or have 6 or 7 names. But the other interesting part is when the Ammonites came up against Jabesh, Jabesh wanted to go out and make a covenant with them. Covenant meaning an agreement. They didn't want to go to war with them. Why? Pardon? Probably knew that they would lose, and that's generally it. The first person to speak up is generally the first person, the weaker argument. But they were afraid of him, and they wanted to make a covenant because they said, if we make a covenant with you, then we'll serve you. So you don't do us harm, and we will serve you. Let's be friends about this. And then verse 2, Nahash answered and said, on a condition. On a condition. Let me get to the correct page here. That I may thrust out your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. Several things in this verse. Why the right eye? And why an eye at all? And what would that mean? And their protection is basically gone, because it's as Brother Stabler said, 90% of the people are right side dominant, meaning that they see better out of their right eye. If you shoot weapons, you aim out of your dominant. Most people aim out of their dominant side. There's a few that can switch over. But if you have a shield in front of you and you're right-handed, I'm left-handed, so it wouldn't work for me, but let's say I'm right-handed. I'm right-handed. I've got a shield up here, and I'm trying to peer around that shield so I can use my weapon. I've got to expose my whole head. So it would make them ineffective warriors. So it basically neuters them in the act of war. And that, to me, is the main reason. And just laying it for a reproach, that had nothing to do with it, but that's, how people use rationale to do things. Then the elders of Jabesh said unto him, give us 7 days that we may send messengers into all the coast of Israel and see if there's anybody going to come save us. Now, I'm paraphrasing some of this and just doing like a little survey here, but they didn't want their eyes put out. So they said, would you at least give us 7 days to see if somebody's going to come save us? Not unusual back in those days for things like that to happen. So the Ammonites agreed to that. Messengers went out. Verse 6, and the Spirit of God came unto Saul, and when he heard those tidings, his anger was kindled greatly. He took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, and before we get to what he says here, have we seen something similar to this before, where something was cut in pieces and sent throughout all the nations? Pardon? That woman that was assaulted and killed, and as a warning, and that's what's taking place here. So he sends then saying, whosoever cometh not forth against after Saul and unto his oxen, and the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. Saul had just been appointed as their leader. Why did they want a king? One of their reasons was the king would do the fighting for them. Well, now Saul cuts up these animals, send all the parts out, and says, Brother Doug, you don't come and fight with me, you're going to be like one of these oxen. What is that going to do for you? Is that going to inspire you to go fight? More than likely, right? More than likely. So here he's just saying, folks, it's up to all of us. So what happened then? They came out with one consent. So everybody is on the... Today, before battles take place, normally they have a little get together, and depending on the unit and the group and all, but they have a little, well, let's take it at a football game. What happens before they go on the field for a football game? A little pep talk. So here they came together with one consent. And when he numbered them, and Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. So 330,000 people responded to that invitation to come and fight. Probably a portion of them did it out of fear. A portion of them did it out of respect for Saul, and that they did want to make sure everything went the way it was supposed to. And verse 9 says, they sent the messengers, and they said unto the messengers that came, thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. I can kind of imagine how relieved they were when they found out reinforcements were coming. A little off subject, but one of my uncles in World War II, he had hit all the major fronts. He was in the tanks. And on North Africa, they had been pushed back, and he said their next stop was in the water if reinforcements had not come. So I can imagine how relieved those folks were that had been pushed all the way back to the beachhead and had no place to go, because tanks don't float. So reinforcements came, and he made it back from the war. So I can just imagine how happy they were when they saw those reinforcements coming. Therefore, the men of Jabesh, tomorrow we will, and then they made the comment, therefore the men of Jabesh said, tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemeth good to you. Well, he's holding out just a little bit here, isn't he? He had asked them for 7 days to see if somebody was going to come and save them, and now he goes out and says, well, tomorrow we're going to come out. You can just do with us what you want to. What message is that sending to the Amorites? They're capitulating. Is there anything wrong with surprise when it comes to military conflicts? Verse 11, it was on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. I fortunately have never had to serve in combat that close. Brother Price, on the other hand, has been basically eye to eye in Korea. I have to look at it from the historical perspective. He can look at it from the in-person perspective, but I can just imagine that if someone is defeated to the point that, because I know that soldiers try to stay together, they're stronger in company than they are by themselves, so they try to stay together. So I can just imagine how deflated a group would be if they had been scattered to the point that they couldn't even see a friend around. Is that pretty close, Brother Price? For those of you that don't know, Brother Price had, like I say, he had basically been eye to eye with the North Koreans, the Chinese that were coming in and all, and he's heard the shouts and the bugle calls and the stampedes. So if you want to know some firsthand experience about that kind of thing, he would be a good person to talk to. But here, no 2 are left together. Verse 12, the people said unto Samuel, who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring the men that we may put them to death. And Saul said, there shall not be a man put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. So here, after the battle is over, notice it didn't take place before the battle, but after the battle is over and everybody is saved, what did the main group want to do with those of Belial, those that were protesting against Saul, those that was not going to honor Saul's position? They wanted to bring every one of them in and kill them. And Saul wouldn't allow it. Basically, he said, there's been enough killing. Samuel to the people, come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So this is just speculation on my part, but if Saul had not basically pardoned those men and said, no, we've killed enough, everything's good to go, would they have had the peace that they had? Because in America, and I go back in history a little bit, if you look at the Hatfields and McCoys, for instance, what started that fight? So say some. In reality, what started that feud? Some say a pig, some say it was a romance, some say you don't really know what started that feud, but what kept that feud going? Retribution. You hurt one of mine, I'm going to hurt one of yours. And it just went back and forth. And I'm not sure today that that the Hatfields and McCoys that still live in that region, those that have deep roots to that particular region, I am not sure that they're totally at peace today. But the rest of our country that's sort of gone away, it's been diffused a little bit, and we're not that way much anymore. But over in the Mideast, it is still eye for eye type thing. So here, if Saul hadn't made the concession and said, no, there's been enough killing, if he had gone out and got them, then that would have just angered that family, and it would just keep on going. Questions or comments on chapter 11? Yes. Yes, sir, Brother Gold. Yes, sir. Well, I think they were quite weak at this point because they immediately wanted to make a bargain. Yes, sir. Brother Fuller. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Oh, excuse me. Anything else on chapter 11? Okay, let's slide into chapter 12. Samuel said unto all Israel, behold, I have hearkened unto your voice in all that ye said unto me, and have made a king over you. And now, behold, the king walketh before you. And I am old and gray-headed, and behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from childhood unto this day. Samuel had literally walked before them in service from the time he was young. We don't know exactly how young, but he had served all. But what does the phrase mean that his sons walk, my sons are with you? Because he had appointed his sons as co-judges. They had been over doing some judging, and they were not looked upon favorably. The elders had gone to Samuel saying, basically, your two sons are worthless. We don't want anything to do with them. You're getting old. We want a king. So this is why Samuel went to and prayed to God, and this is where the transfer took place from judges, prophets to kings. So what does it mean that he's now saying, my sons are with you? Exactly. I'm old. I'm going away. The king is here. My sons, they have no authority. They're with you. They're just like you now. And that's, to me, that's what that means. Verse 3, behold, here I am, a witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. This next little section is just going in, and Samuel is looking at the people and saying, have you tell me in what way I have offended you? Have I taken anything from you? Have I done anything to offend you? And the next, when we get down to the answer, because he said he would restore it, and verse 4 says, thou hast not defrauded us, nor oppressed us, neither hast thou taken aught of any man's hand. So Samuel had told them that he had basically served them all the days of his life. He asked them to tell him what he had done that he needed to correct, and they came back and told him that you have nothing. We're good. How many of us in our life can make that same plea and look out at people and say, tell me what I've done to hurt you in any fashion and I'll make it right? And have the same comment come back to them that you hadn't done anything of all the people that we've come in contact with. So he hadn't defrauded them, he hadn't oppressed them, he hadn't been like his sons, in other words. In verse 5, he said unto them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day that ye have not found aught in my hand. And they answered, he is witness. So here, to me at least, when he makes the phrase, the Lord is witness against you, what is he telling them? In simple Southern English, what is he telling them? The Lord knows everything. You just made a statement. The Lord knows if that statement is correct or not. And and when they responded, he is witness, that means that they understood then that the Lord knows everything, and the answer they had given was correct. That they truly meant that he had not done anything to harm them. Then Samuel said unto the people, it is the Lord that advanced Moses and Aaron, and that brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. So here's just going into, again, recounting things. Now therefore stand still, that I may reason with you before the Lord of all the righteous acts of the Lord, which he did to you and to your fathers. When Jacob was come into Egypt, and your fathers cried unto the Lord, then the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, which brought forth your fathers out of Egypt, and made them dwell in this place. And when they forgot the Lord their God, he sold them into the hand of Sisera, captain of the host of Hazor, and into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. And they cried unto the Lord and said, we have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord and have served Baalim and Ashtaroth, but now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, and we will serve thee. Again, he's just recounting everything that had taken place there, but just to the point we've been in our Old Testament study, how often had they not followed the Lord's instructions? How often had he done something to get their attention? And how often had they made a plea and came back to the good graces? And again, the same thing happens to us today. We have a tendency to be solid and immovable. Then some drift away, something happens, and they come back. So nothing new is going on here. Verse 9, when let's going down to verse 11. And the Lord sent Zerubbabel and Bedan and Jephthah and Samuel. All of these were, time's up, but all of these were chosen by God, judges, profit to come in and save them. And I'll let Brother Terry pick up there Wednesday night. Thank y'all for your comments and your attention.